The porch light flickered once and held. Frank Calloway heard the knock, 3 soft taps, like somebody scared of his own knuckles. It was 11:47 at night. Rain coming sideways off the gutter. Frank set his coffee down on the kitchen counter and walked to the door in his slippers, because that's what a man does in his own house. He pulled the chain. He pulled the bolt. He opened it maybe 6 inches. And there on his porch, in a suit jacket 2 sizes too big and no shoes on his feet, stood a boy. 16 maybe. Bloodied lip. Hair plastered flat. Eyes like a deer that just heard a rifle bolt. The boy looked up at him and said 5 words that would change everything. Please don't send me back. Now you might be wondering, who is this boy? Who is he running from? And what would you do if you opened your door at midnight and found him there? Stay with me. Because this story, this one stays with you. Frank Calloway was 67. He had worked iron for 41 years, bridges, high-rises, water towers, anything that needed a man willing to walk a beam in the wind. His back was bent now. His knees made noise. But he still got up at 5 every morning, still made his own coffee, still kept his porch swept. That was who he was. He lived in a small clapboard house on a quiet street in Queens, the kind of street where every house looked the same and every lawn was the size of a postage stamp. 2 years ago his wife Alina passed. Cancer. Quick. They'd been married 43 years and never had children. Alina had wanted kids, God, how she'd wanted them, but it didn't happen, and after a while they stopped talking about it. Now she was gone, and Frank lived alone with her recipe cards still in the drawer, her reading glasses still on the nightstand, her Afghan still folded over the back of the couch like she just stepped out for a minute. Frank didn't move her things. He couldn't. His days had a rhythm. Coffee at 5:30. Newspaper at 6. He'd walk down to the corner deli and buy 1 egg sandwich from Mike, who'd been running that deli since 1979, and he'd eat it on a bench in the park where Alina used to feed the pigeons. He'd come home. He'd putter. He'd watch the evening news. He went to bed early. He slept badly. That was his life. Frank wasn't stupid. He read the papers. He knew what kind of city he lived in. He'd seen the headlines, the Russo family this, the Russo family that, indictments, photographs of men in long coats walking into federal courthouses. He'd seen the name, Vincent Russo, more times than he cared to count. Capo. That was the word they used. Frank knew what a capo was. Everybody from Queens knew. But Frank had nothing to do with any of it. He paid his taxes. He kept his head down. He went to Mass on Christmas and Easter, and that was about it. He wasn't Italian. His people were Irish way back. He was just a guy with a porch light and a coffee pot and a wife in the ground. Now here's the thing. He wasn't naive. He'd worked too many years with too many kinds of men to be naive. He'd seen guys with bad debts get visits at the job site. He'd seen envelopes change hands in the union hall. He'd looked the other way more than once, because that's what you did if you wanted to keep working. But he'd never been part of it. His daddy had told him once, a man can pass through bad weather and still be dry if he keeps his collar up and his mouth shut. Frank had kept his collar up his whole life. So when the knock came at 11:47 on that rainy Tuesday in late October, Frank didn't think about Russos. He thought about a kid lost in the rain. He thought about Alina, who would have already had the kettle on by now. And he opened the door. The boy stood there shivering. The suit was wrong. That was the first thing. A man's jacket, slate gray, expensive cut, draped on him like a coat on a hanger. The boy was small for 16. Fine-boned. Dark hair pasted to his forehead. blood on his bottom lip and a thin scratch along his jaw, like he'd gone through a hedge. His socks were soaked black. No shoes. Who runs in the rain without shoes? Frank didn't ask. He stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "You're letting the heat out." The boy hesitated. His eyes went past Frank, scanning the hallway, the kitchen light, the dark living room beyond. Like he was checking for someone. Then he stepped over the threshold. Frank closed the door behind him. He turned the bolt. He left the chain off. He didn't want the boy to feel locked in. Small thing. Mattered. "What's your name?" Frank said. The boy looked at the floor. "Marco." "Marco what?" A pause. "Just Marco." Frank nodded slowly. He didn't push. He'd been a foreman long enough to know when a boy wasn't going to talk yet. You let them sit. You let them warm up. You let the words come when they came. "You hungry?" Frank said. The boy nodded once sharp, like he was ashamed to admit it. Frank walked into the kitchen. The boy followed at a distance, keeping his back near the wall. Frank had a pot of beef and barley soup from 2 nights ago in the fridge, Alina's recipe, written on a card in her perfect Catholic school handwriting. He poured it into a smaller pan and turned the heat low. He took down a bowl and a spoon. He cut a thick slice of bread and buttered it. He set a place at the table. "Sit," he said. The boy sat. He sat the way an animal sits, close to the edge of the chair, weight forward, ready to bolt. Frank pretended not to notice. He set the bowl in front of the boy and sat down across from him with his coffee. The boy stared at the soup. Then he picked it up, the whole bowl, and drank it straight from the rim. Burning hot. He didn't seem to notice. He drank half of it in one long pull, set it down, picked up the bread and ate the bread in 3 bites. Then he picked up the bowl again. Frank watched all this without a word. He thought about Alina. About all the church suppers she'd cooked for the union picnics, the way she'd lean over the table and say, "Eat, eat, you boys work too hard." He thought about how she would have put a hand on this boy's shoulder by now. Frank didn't. He didn't think the boy would let him. When the bowl was empty, Frank refilled it. The boy ate slower this time. He used the spoon. His hands were shaking. Frank noticed his knuckles, a small cut on the right one, fresh, the kind you get from punching something. Or someone. "You want dry clothes?" Frank said. The boy nodded. Frank stood up. He went down the hall to the bedroom and pulled a Navy Union sweatshirt off the top shelf. Sweatpants from the dresser. Thick gray socks. He brought it all back. "Bathrooms down the hall on the left," Frank said. "Towel on the rack. Take a hot shower." "Take your time." The boy looked up at him. For the first time, really looked at him. There was something in those eyes Frank couldn't read. Not gratitude. Not yet. Something more like disbelief. Like the boy was waiting for the trick. Like he didn't believe a stranger could just open a door and hand a kid a bowl of soup. Frank held his gaze a moment. Then he set the clothes on the table and turned away. "Go on," he said. "I'll be here when you come out." He listened to the shower run. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at his coffee, and he thought. About the boy's face. About the suit. A boy in a man's suit doesn't fall out of nowhere. A boy with a bloodied lip and no shoes doesn't show up on your porch on a Tuesday night in October just because. Somebody had done something to him, or he had seen something, or both. Frank looked at the window. The rain hadn't let up. No cars he didn't recognize. Just the quiet street he'd lived on for 35 years. He thought about Alina. She would say, "You take him in, Frankie. You take him in, and you don't ask questions till morning." Frank got up. He turned off the kitchen light, except for the little one over the stove. He turned on the lamp in the living room, just the small one, the one with the green glass shade Alina had loved. He took the Afghan from the back of the couch and shook it out. He laid it over the arm of the couch where the boy could reach it. He fluffed the pillow she used to nap on in the afternoons. He stood there for a moment, holding it, and he thought of her. He set the pillow down. He went back to the kitchen. He filled a glass of water. He set it on the coffee table next to the lamp. He didn't know how long it had been since this boy had slept in a place where nothing was going to grab him. Maybe a while. The shower stopped. Frank sat down at the kitchen table again with a fresh cup of coffee. He waited. The boy came out a few minutes later, hair damp, wearing Frank's sweatshirt that hung past his fingertips. He looked even younger now. 16, Frank had guessed. Now he looked 14. He looked at the couch. He looked at the Afghan. He looked at Frank. "I made it up for you," Frank said. "Sleep. We'll talk in the morning if you want." "We don't have to talk at all." The boy stood there. He didn't move. Frank could see him trying to work out the angle, trying to find the catch. There wasn't one. After a long moment, the boy walked over to the couch. He sat down. He pulled the Afghan over himself. He laid his head on Alina's pillow. He stared at the ceiling for maybe 10 seconds. And he was out. Just like that. The boy was asleep. Frank watched him from the kitchen doorway. The boy's breathing slowed. His hands unclenched from the edge of the blanket. His mouth fell open a little. He looked like any kid sleeping on any couch in any house in America. He didn't look like trouble. He looked like a child. Frank drank his coffee. Just one night, he thought. I'll figure something out in the morning. Maybe call the precinct. Maybe call Father Donnelly, who'd been at St. Bridget's forever and would know what to do with a runaway. Maybe just feed him breakfast and ask his real name and see where they were. Frank wasn't going to send him back into the rain. Not tonight. He turned off the kitchen light. He left the small lamp on in the living room, low, in case the boy woke up scared. He went down the hall to his bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed. He took off his slippers. He laid down on top of the covers with his clothes on, just in case. He told himself he would only close his eyes for a minute. He told himself this would all look different in the morning. He didn't know yet, but the morning was already coming. And it was bringing two men in long coats with it. It was 4 in the morning when the headlights came up the street. Frank had been half awake. Old men sleep light, and Frank slept lighter than most. He heard the engine first, big, smooth, expensive. Not a delivery truck. Not a neighbor. The headlights swept the curtains in his bedroom, and he sat up before he was fully conscious. He got to the window. He moved the curtain an inch. A black sedan parked across the street. 2 doors opened at the same time. 2 men got out. Long coats. Both of them. One was big, broad through the shoulders, walked like a man who'd done time in a gym and a few other places. The other was smaller, neat, the kind who carries a folded handkerchief. They didn't look around. They didn't case the street. They came straight up Frank's walk like they already knew which house. And Frank's stomach went cold. He moved fast for a man with bad knees. Down the hall into the living room. The boy was still asleep. Frank put a hand on his shoulder and shook him hard. The boy came awake with a violent jerk, hands up, eyes wide. "Easy," Frank whispered. "Easy. Listen to me. Listen. There are 2 men coming up the walk. Long coats. Black car. You know who they are." The boy's face went white. He knew. "Get up. Now. Don't talk. Walk." Frank pulled him off the couch. He grabbed the Afghan and the pillow, and threw them in a heap on the chair like they'd always been there. He looked at the boys' wet shoes by the door bad. The men would see those. He grabbed the shoes and shoved them in the front closet under his old work coats. He moved the boy down the hall, past his bedroom, to the door at the end. It was a small room. Alina had used it as her sewing room. Frank hadn't touched it since she died. He opened the door, pushed the boy in. "Closet," he whispered. "All the way in the back. Behind the dresses. Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't come out till I come get you. Promise me," the boy nodded. His eyes were huge. "Promise me," Frank said again. "I promise," the boy said. First words he'd said since "please don't send me back." Frank shut the door. He walked back down the hall. He stopped in the kitchen. He poured the boy's second bowl into the sink and rinsed it. He put the bowl in the drying rack like it had been there all night. He looked around. The glass of water on the coffee table. He grabbed it, drank half of it, set it down again. Now it was his. He took a breath. The knock came. 3 knocks. Not like the boys. These knocks set open the door. Frank turned on the porch light. He opened the door, chain off, no hesitation, like a man who just got woken up and isn't happy about it. "Yeah," he said. The big one was in front. The neat one stood a step behind him, hands folded. "Sorry to bother you, sir," the neat one said. His voice was soft, polite. That was the scariest part. "We're looking for a boy. 16. Dark hair. He may have come this way a few hours ago. He's a member of our family. He's confused. He's missed at home." Frank scratched his neck. "A boy. 16, yes, sir, and you're knocking on doors at 4 in the morning. We've been driving all night. We're worried." Frank looked from one to the other. He let the silence sit. "I haven't seen anybody," he said. "I went to bed at 11. Slept through till you knocked. I don't know what to tell you." The big one stepped forward a half-inch. "Just a half-inch. Enough." "Mind if we look around, sir?" the neat one said. Frank's heart was kicking. He kept his face like leather. "Yeah, I mind. It's 4 in the morning. I don't know you. You got a badge, you can come back with it. Otherwise we're done here." The neat one smiled. It wasn't a smile. "Of course, sir. We understand." He reached into his pocket. Frank's gut clenched. The man pulled out a small photograph. Held it up. Frank looked. It was the boy. School picture looked like Marco in a clean white shirt, smiling like a kid who'd been told to smile. "His name is Marco Rosso," the neat one said. "His father is a friend. Vincent Rosso. You may have heard of him." Frank let his face do nothing. "Name doesn't ring a bell. It's been in the papers. I don't read the papers much anymore." "Bad news, all of it." The neat one's smile didn't move. "If you do see him, sir, if anyone in the neighborhood mentions a boy fitting that description, you call this number." He held out a card. Plain. White. A phone number, nothing else. Frank took it. He didn't want to take it. He took it. "Vincent's a worried father," the neat one said. "Whoever helps bring his boy home, it's appreciated." "Very much appreciated," Frank nodded. "Sure, we'll come back at sunrise," the neat one said. "Just to check. In case you remember anything." That last word hung in the air like a wire. Frank held the door. "You do what you need to do," he said. The men turned. They walked down his steps. They got back in the black car. The car didn't start right away. It just sat there for a long minute, lights off, while they watched his house. Then the engine turned over and the car pulled away slow. Frank closed the door. He locked it. He put on the chain. He stood with his forehead against the wood for 10 full seconds. Then he walked to the sewing room and opened the closet. The boy was crammed in the back, wedged behind Aliner's old church dresses. He was crying without making any sound at all. Frank reached in. He took him by the shoulders. He pulled him out gently, like a man pulling a bird out of a chimney. "They're gone," Frank said. "For now. They're coming back. We got till sunrise. You hear me?" "We got maybe 90 minutes," the boy nodded. He couldn't speak. Frank looked at him. He thought about the photograph. He thought about Vincent Russo. He thought about every story he'd ever read in the daily news, every grainy photograph, every word that meant something else. And he thought, okay. So this is what tonight is. Now I want you to think for a second. Most people at this moment, they call the cops. They open the door and they hand the boy over and they say, "Look, I got nothing to do with any of this." That would be the smart play. That would be the safe play. Some of you out there, be honest. You would have called the cops the moment that boy said his last name. But Frank wasn't most people. Frank had spent his life on beams 40 stories up, trusting the man across from him not to drop his end. He understood something about trust that other people forget. If you're standing on this story right now and it's pulling at you, do me a small favor, hit that subscribe button. We do these every week, and the next one might be your favorite. Now let's get back to Frank, because Frank is moving. He went to the kitchen and pulled a tin box from the high cupboard over the fridge. It was an old Socrates tin. Inside was a thick fold of cash, emergency money, the kind every working man's wife kept somewhere. Alina had filled it over the years. 2,000 and change. Frank had never touched it. He put the tin in his coat pocket. He went to the hall closet. He pulled out his work boots, old ones, soft, broken in. He looked at Marco. "These'll be big on you. Lace them tight." He grabbed a wool cap. He grabbed his green canvas barn coat. He grabbed Alina's car keys. She'd had a little Buick, 10 years old, low mileage, the kind of car nobody looks at twice. He kept it running. He paid the insurance. He didn't know why. Now he knew why. "Where are we going?" Marco said. His voice was small. "Upstate," Frank said. "I know a guy. We need to be on the road in 10 minutes. Eat something. There's a banana on the counter. Eat it walking." Marco ate the banana walking. Frank wrote a note for himself and stuck it on the fridge, going to see Pete. Back Friday. Anyone asked, that was his story. He'd had a friend named Pete once. Pete was dead. Didn't matter. He looked around the kitchen one last time. Alina's recipe cards in the drawer. Alina's coffee mug on the rack. Alina's calendar still on October, even though it was nearly November. He turned off the lights. He locked the back door. He looked at the boy. "Get in the car. Backseat. Lay down on the floor till I tell you. There's a blanket back there." Marco got in. Frank backed the Buick out of the driveway slow. He drove 3 blocks east, then 4 blocks north, then he turned and watched his mirrors for 2 more blocks. Nothing. No black sedan. He got on the parkway. He drove the speed limit. He drove like a retired ironworker going to see an old friend. They drove for an hour and a half. The sky started to gray. Marco sat up after the first half hour. Frank handed him a thermos of coffee he'd filled at the last minute. They didn't talk for a long time. "Somewhere past Bear Mountain," Marco said. "Why are you doing this?" Frank kept his eyes on the road. "Doing what?" "Helping me. You don't know me. You could be in trouble." Frank thought about that. He thought about Alina. He thought about all the years he'd kept his collar up. My wife, he said finally. She would have done it. So I'm doing it. Marco was quiet. Then he said, my father had a man killed last week. Frank didn't take his eyes off the road. Did he said. I was there. In the back room of his social club. I wasn't supposed to be there. I came in to ask him for the car. He had a man on the floor. He had a gun. He looked at me and he didn't even stop. He just looked at me and he finished it. Like I was supposed to learn something. Frank's hands tightened on the wheel. He didn't speak. 3 days later, Marco said, he told me I was going away to college. In Italy. He said it was time for me to learn what kind of man I was. He said when I came back I'd be ready. I'd be made. I'd be his. Marco was crying quiet now, the way he had in the closet, no sound. I don't want to be made. I don't want to be his. I want to be a person. Frank breathed in slow through his nose. How'd you get out? I asked to go to the bathroom at a restaurant. I went out the back. I ran. I don't even know how I got to your street. I just kept running until I saw a porch light. Frank nodded. Okay, he said. Okay, they drove another 20 minutes in silence. Then Frank reached over and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Just for a second. Just once. He took it away. The sun was up by the time they turned off the highway. Frank drove down a county road, past frozen pumpkin fields, past a clapboard church with a leaning steeple. He turned onto a long gravel driveway. At the end of it was a small farmhouse with a tin roof. A barn. A pickup truck on blocks. And standing on the porch, holding a coffee mug, was a tall man in his 70s with a white beard. The man watched the Buick come up the drive. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just watched. Frank stopped the car. He got out. He walked to the porch alone. He left Marco in the passenger seat. The man on the porch said, Frankie, Tommy, long time, long time. Tommy looked over Frank's shoulder at the boy in the car. He looked back at Frank. He didn't ask. I need a favor, Frank said. Big one. Maybe the biggest. Tommy took a sip of his coffee. 1982, he said. What about it? You pulled me out from under that beam. I would have been dead in 3 minutes. They told me later. 3 minutes, I know, I told you then. I said anything. Ever? Anything I remember. Tommy looked at the boy again. He looked at Frank. He running from something or somebody. Both. How bad? Bad as it gets in this country. Tommy nodded slow. He set the mug down on the porch rail. Bring him in, he said. I got eggs. That was a week ago. Frank was back on his porch now, in his rocker, in the cold autumn air, with a cup of coffee going cool in his hands. The black sedan had come back twice. Frank had told them the same story both times. He didn't know any Russos. He was an old man. He went to bed early. He was sorry he couldn't help. The men had not been happy. They had not been violent. They had stood on his porch and looked at him a long time. The neat one had said, if you remember anything. Frank had said, I won't. They hadn't come back after the second time. Frank didn't know what that meant. Maybe they'd believed him. Maybe they'd moved on. Maybe they hadn't, and one morning he'd open his door and that would be that. He'd thought about that a lot. He decided he was okay with it. There are worse ways to end up than knowing you did one decent thing. He sat on the porch and he watched a leaf come down off the maple in his yard. It tumbled in the air the way leaves do, that slow, drunk fall, and it landed in the grass and lay still. He thought about Elena. He thought about how she would have loved that the boy had eaten her soup. He thought about how she had always set an extra place at Thanksgiving for whoever the Lord sent, and how every year for 43 years he had teased her about it, and how every year she had said, You never know, Frankie. You just never know. The mailman came up the walk. Frank lifted a hand. The mailman lifted one back. He set a small stack of mail in the box and kept going. Frank waited a minute. He didn't want to look eager. He set down his coffee. He stood up slow, knees, and walked to the box. He pulled out the mail. Bills, a flyer for storm windows, a church bulletin, and one small envelope. No return address. Postmarked from a town upstate Frank had never heard of. He held it a long moment before he opened it. He went back to the rocker. He sat down. He opened the envelope with his thumb. There was no letter inside. Just one thing. A Polaroid. Frank held it up to the porch light. The picture showed Marco, a little fuller in the face, a little less hollow, standing in a pasture, holding the lead rope of a chestnut horse. He was wearing a flannel shirt that was too big for him. He was smiling. Not big. Not the school picture smile. Just a small, real tired, alive kind of smile. The kind of smile a boy has when no one has hit him in a while, and no one is going to. Frank looked at the picture for a long time. The wind picked up. The leaves moved. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once. Frank stood up. He went inside. He walked to the living room. Above the fireplace on the mantel was Eleanor's picture, a black and white one from their wedding, her veil thrown back, laughing at something he'd said. Frank set the Polaroid next to it. He stepped back. He looked at the two pictures. The wife who had wanted children and the boy who had needed a door. He thought, look at that, Ellie. Look at that. He stood there a while. Then he turned and walked back to the front door. He stepped out onto the porch. He picked up his coffee. It was cold now. He didn't mind. He looked up the quiet street, the houses all in a row, the maples bare, the sky going the color of pewter. He thought about the men in the long coats. He thought about whether they were finished with him. He thought about how it didn't matter, not really. The boy was alive. The boy was safe. The boy was holding a horse. Frank reached up and pulled the chain on the porch light. The bulb went dark. The street was quiet. A working man's street in a working man's town, where nothing ever happens. Where nobody is watching. Where one old man with a coffee pot and a wife in the ground can open a door at midnight, and a frightened boy can step through it, and the whole arc of one life can bend a different way, and nobody will ever know. Except him. Except her. Except a horse in a pasture upstate, and a Polaroid on a mantel, and a porch light that doesn't need to be on tonight. Frank Calloway sat back down in his rocker. He pulled his collar up against the cold. And he smiled, a small, real tired, alive kind of smile. Just like the boys.